Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Brown. I'm going to give you the masterclass on resident engagement in relation to the social housing decarbonisation fund and what needs to be covered. So I've got about 20 years experience working with many organisations to do with retrofit. And I work for Turner and Townsend on an occasional basis. So here we go with the presentation. Let's start with why resident engagement is so important. Obviously, we're getting access into a homeowner's house and we're doing works to their home, so we need their agreement to do that, and crucially they are the energy user, and the building needs to perform as designed, and that means that it has to be used properly. Retrofit success criteria really is has been sort of covered by PAS 2035. This is a publicly available specification which recognises the risks associated with retrofit. It was launched in 2019 and it is a specification of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Also, in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, government has launched a white paper that will obligate registered providers to involve tenants in the decisions that affect them. And of course, retrofit is just such a thing. Given that there are lots of risks associated with retrofit, if we don't get this right, then there are or can be reputational risks and the financial consequences of that too. Resident engagement really needs to occur throughout the resident engagement journey, from the first engagement with the resident right to the final handover stage. It needs the residents' buy-in, their cooperation, in other words, throughout the journey as well. As I've said, have to access their homes and also address the needs of the individual resident. There are those that are vulnerable and those that need special needs, and everybody needs to learn how to use the systems properly. You ought to have a resident engagement plan. In fact, the SHDF application form mentions that you have to demonstrate how a tenant's needs are considered throughout the project. So having a plan is a good way of demonstrating that. And the plan ought to follow the whole engagement journey from the beginning, awareness raising, through to after the works have been completed. You see here the engagement journey, awareness about creating a receptive audience for a proposed retrofit program. This is done up front before projects are conceived in detail. When projects are ready and you need to consult on those, this goes to the buy-in stage, where the individual projects are described and the benefits communicated, share the plans. This is a very important step to win the trust of the residents for the following stages. Next is design, where there's access needed into the home for the assessment and the design work, followed then by installation, which can be disruptive and difficult for the residents. Their cooperation is very much needed here. Once the works are completed, it's about handing over to the resident, ensuring they know how to use the system, and post-works, checking that they indeed do know how to use the system. I'll go through each one of these stages and explain in a bit more detail. The awareness stage, getting a receptive audience. when the plans are being conceived for retrofit, it's a really good idea to engage the residents, build their understanding of what retrofit is all about and how they will benefit from it. And this gives them an opportunity to input. It's a bit like a consultation, and address any of their concerns that they have right up front. So how's this done? Well, through various events with the residents, with the local community. It can engage residents associations, other community groups. Good to have resident engagement champions specializing in retrofit. Here we'll also have various meetings and that sort of thing to explain what is intended. Using examples is very helpful, referring to case studies, some show homes or exemplar homes, taking people to see those is helpful, and having road shows demonstrating the different technologies too. The materials used ought to be really clear, easily understood, and it can be helpful to co-brand some of these materials. If it's a housing association doing the work, co-branding with the local authority or advice provider groups. Once created a receptive environment, we're now at the point where the details of a project is communicated to the residents, and we should not only cover the individual residents affected, it may also include some right to buy, owner occupiers and leaseholders too. The actual benefits that will accrue from the project gets communicated, so that residents should understand their comfort will improve health and well-being. They may get lower energy bills, and of course this is helping address climate change too. So here investment questions are asked, you address the concerns, and it's about addressing their concerns to their satisfaction too. This stage is very much about building trust, so that the residents trust what the housing provider is intending to do, and trust the contractors, subcontractors that have been appointed. So if every resident ought to be listened to, given feedback, provided with updates, in other words, keep them well engaged. Key messages ought to be sort of agreed, and in your communication plan, everyone stays on message. You get your communications teams involved, and maybe use external communication specialists to help with that too. How this is all done at this stage, using workshops or other types of sessions. Face-to-face visits are very important, as is tailoring the message to each type of individual or audience. Older people may need to be interacted with in a different way from people with young families, for example, and certainly those with special needs as well. You use case studies, examples of other homes, being able to demonstrate how others have benefited from the works, and you'd use multiple different channels to communicate in multiple different formats. You'd use photographs, illustrations, videos, a type of thing, maybe information boards too. Helpful to have retrofit champions, communicating the experience of others, sharing positive experiences. Now the project starts proceeding, where access is needed into the residents' homes. Here there will be surveys undertaken of the particulars of the individual building, and the retrofit solution be designed PAS 2035, which I've mentioned, really does address this area of risks where there are roles assigned to different people in terms of that standard. So there's a retrofit assessor who'll be surveying the property, assessing the property. There's a designer who's doing the solution, which they may be a professional, say an architect. There's a role of the retrofit advisor who has to ensure that the advice is understandable. And the retrofit coordinator is a very important role in PAS 2035, who oversees the project right from its beginning to the end. And it's the retrofits coordinator's role, not only to protect the interest of the housing provider, but very much for the residents as well. How this is done at this stage, it's very good practice to be sure that you're listening to the residents' concerns and managing their expectations. The assessor will be asking about their living patterns, how they use the energy. Helpful to ask them at this point how the disruption of installation could be reduced. This may be things like clearing the loft or moving furniture. At all times, the resident should be shown courtesy and respect. This all builds trust, keeping to appointments, for example. In the installation stage, the contractors now go into the home to do the works. This can be a really difficult time for the residents, and their cooperation is very much needed. And the amount of cooperation is often determined by how successful the previous stages have been undertaken, so that the residents are feeling comfortable, trust has been won. PAS 2035 has specifications for this stage 2 concerning resident engagement. PAS 2030 is another standard for the installers of the energy efficiency measures. That's about compliance with various standards. The contractor has to comply with various standards, which includes resident engagement. MCS is a similar specification, which relates to renewable technologies like solar PV or heat pumps. At this stage, really important to minimize the inconvenience that the residents experience. You need strategies and skills in place to help them cope with the disruption, and particularly concerning the elderly, the vulnerable, those with special needs. Again, how we do this, you keep the residents updated. One-to-one is best on the doorstep or electronically, but personalize the interaction at this stage. Maintaining strong project management is helpful in ensuring that the work is scheduled and done when it's supposed to be done. So, as expected, good site conduct, politeness, and so forth. Keeping the site clean. Keeping the residents updated is important as well. Offer progress, the updates. Can use bullet boards, newsletters. I mentioned one-to-ones as well. Probably your contractor will have KPIs on resident satisfaction. So this would mean the residents' views will be surveyed, and any complaints, of course, need to be tracked and the resident kept informed. Works are done. Now time to hand over to the Residents, PAS 2035, 2030 and MCS also specify how this should be done. In particular, PAS 2035 states that the retrofit coordinator must ensure that this handover is done with the residents. The residents now need the information on how to use the controls. Also importantly, the correct use of the controls in order to save the amount of energy that the property is designed to save. Ventilation needs to be discussed, and the residents need to understand how important it is to maintain ventilation. This can prevent or should prevent condensation if the property happens to be underheated for any reason, and the consequences of poor ventilation can damage the building fabric and also bad for health. Where wall insulation is installed, importantly, the resident mustn't knock any holes into it and break the thermal barrier. So how best to do this at this stage? It's touring the house with the resident, and this can't really be rushed, so that the resident has the opportunity to understand the instructions and demonstrate they know how to do it. You need to leave written instructions. These are leaflets, backup instructions online as well. Your customer service centre ought to know also how to manage calls where residents are asking about how to use the equipment that's been installed. The materials, again, should be simple, using clear language, using diagrams. Videos are useful too, and you can put these online. All's not done yet, and you've got to go back and check a few months later, check that the resident is using the system correctly. They should demonstrate how they're using it. Check that the written instructions are available, they're accessible. They might be kept near where the system is installed. Where heat pumps have been installed, it's important to check that the residents are now on the right electricity tariff, that they are not on a dual day-night electricity tariff, which if they are, may mean that electricity bills are in fact higher than previous. So that's an important step to check on. A visit is needed in the heating season, in winter in other words. If the works were done outside of winter, you need to go back in and check that the heating controls are used properly as well. When new tenants move in, they ought to be given instructions as well. A visit, in other words, but also instructions included in their tenancy pack. As part of monitoring and evaluation at the end of a project, surveys would be conducted, and you'd be measuring the level of comfort, health and well-being that the residents experience, and what's happened to their energy bills, hopefully a lot lower. So finally, I've just put together a few pointers here as a sort of checklist of what needs to be covered by resident engagement for retrofit. You need a resident engagement plan, and that plan, the what, how and who, etc., needs to track through the resident engagement journey. Residents need to be given an understanding of retrofit, creating an environment for their cooperation, Using examples is great, and your staff that interact with residents ought to understand retrofit too. For example, the housing officers, they should understand retrofit and the equipment that's installed. You ought to engage resident participation, empower them to ask questions and understand what is proposed, and use events such as workshops or coffee mornings, that sort of thing as well. Use the community networks. Instructions need to be clear, or communications need to be clear. Messages easily understood, using good news stories, using different channels to communicate information, different formats. And finally, the resident engagement journey in retrofit needs to comply with the specifications in 2035. I've included here a list of material which can be useful. It contains guidance, some codes of practice, and various reports on what successful tenant engagement looks like. So that's the presentation. Here are the details of how to get in touch with us further. I hope you found that useful. Thank you. Bye-bye.